Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a totally fascinating, impartial, and strictly theological exploration of the unseen world. Based on the source texts, we're going to unpack a concept that has literally captivated humanity for millennia, and that is the evolution of black magic. We'll be looking purely at the chronological and theological descriptions found in these texts, mapping out exactly how these ancient esoteric practices have evolved from deep history right into our modern day.
So, to start us off, I want you to think about a question that has probably crossed your mind at least once or twice. How do fortune tellers actually know your secrets? Seriously, how is it that someone just reading a palm or staring into a cup of tea can sometimes tell you something unbelievably specific and accurate about your own life? It's a question that drops us right into the mystery of the unseen world. And the ancient accounts actually reveal a highly detailed, literal explanation for the supernatural mechanics behind this whole phenomenon.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline. Islamic theology actually outlines the evolution of magic across some very distinct eras. It starts way back in ancient Babylon, with the story of two angels, Harut and Marut, who the records state were sent down as a test to humanity, teaching them magic but with some incredibly strict warnings. Then the timeline fast-forwards to the Prophet's era, detailing a highly specific historical incident involving a curse placed in a well. And finally, it adapts all the way to the modern day, where these unseen forces have somehow found their way right into our living rooms through things like tarot cards and TV horoscopes. The methods definitely change over time, but the foundational theology argues that the unseen source remains exactly the same. Now, to understand how these fortune tellers actually get their information, we have to look upward. The texts highlight this incredibly vivid imagery describing what happens in the heavens when a divine decree is made by God. Just listen to this description. The angels beat their wings in submission, with a sound like a chain beating on a rock. It's this overwhelming, awe-inspiring moment of cosmic communication. But according to the theology, it's during this exact thunderous moment that things get intercepted. And this is where the literal step-by-step mechanics of the unseen world get absolutely wild. The texts explain that when angels speak in the clouds about future events on earth, unseen beings known as jinn attempt to eavesdrop. They literally stand one above the other, stacked up toward the heavens like a giant ladder. When the jinn right at the top hears a word of truth, he passes it down to the one beneath him, and so on, until it finally reaches the lips of a human sorcerer or soothsayer. The records do note that sometimes these eavesdropping jinn are struck by flaming fire before they can pass the word along, but sometimes they succeed. But here is the absolute kicker. It revolves around the number 100. The sources say that when the jinn finally drops that one single piece of intercepted truth into the ear of the fortune teller, they add 100 lies to it. And honestly, this brilliantly explains the psychology of why people fall for fortune tellers in the first place. The fortune teller predicts one true thing, that tiny intercepted truth, and when it actually happens, the person says, "Wow, didn't they tell us this would happen?" That one single truth totally validates the 100 lies, creating this incredibly powerful illusion of mystical authority.
What's really interesting is that these texts make it very, very clear that the medium simply doesn't matter. The modern evolutionary forms of magic are all rooted in this exact same eavesdropping process. So, whether modern practitioners are reading patterns in the sand, interpreting tea leaves, calculating numerology using people's names, throwing random items into iron pots, dealing out tarot cards, or just broadcasting horoscopes on TV, the theology categorizes them all exactly the same way. They're all considered soothsayers accessing that same intercepted, corrupted information.
Because of this deep connection to the unseen, the theological warnings are intensely strict. Just neutrally reporting what the text says here, if a person goes to a fortune teller or even just reads a horoscope as a joke or for light entertainment, their prayers are mathematically blocked from being accepted or rewarded for 40 entire days. And it goes even further than that. Actually believing in what the soothsayer says is considered a direct act of disbelief in the Quran and the revelations sent down to the Prophet. It is treated as a highly severe spiritual offense, no exceptions.
Section 1. Magic and the Prophet, the historical account. And this brilliantly illustrates the deeply physical nature of how these curses were allegedly constructed. Moving into the historical narrative, the sources document a very specific moment when black magic was weaponized directly against the Prophet Muhammad by his opponents, simply to halt the progress of Islam. The accounts describe that a Jewish servant was actually utilized to gather incredibly specific, personal items. We're talking the Prophet's comb and actual strands of his hair.
These were then tied into knots, placed down inside a well, and carefully hidden under the spathe of a male date palm. It shows us that historically, magic wasn't just some spoken incantation, it was a physical ritual utilizing personal DNA and hidden earthly elements. The prophets suffered from the effects of this for a prolonged period before the spell was ultimately uncovered and destroyed.
So, that brings us to a really vital question for believers today. How does Islamic theology combat these unseen forces? If jinn, black magic, and even the evil eye caused by intense human jealousy are real and active threats, what is the prescribed anatomy of the cure? Basically, how do people fight back against an enemy they can't even see?
Well, the source texts draw a super stark contrast between two entirely different paths of healing. On one side, you have the harmful, culturally ingrained practices of fake healers, who are often referred to as kabir. And on the flip side, you have authentic Ruqya Sharia, which is the rigorously prescribed, purely theological method of healing derived directly from the Quran and prophetic traditions.
Let's look at the fake healers first, because the records detail their highly deceptive methods. For example, one source mentions a healer demanding a piece of a burial shroud, literally grave clothes, just to write a talisman. Even worse, some actually demand that sins be committed right on the amulet itself to appease these unseen forces. They also use wild, deceptive tactics, like telling a patient their curse is buried at the bottom of the ocean in Sri Lanka. I mean, they make it sound impossibly grand and totally unfixable. The text emphasized that the ultimate goal of these fake healers, and the dark spells they use, is to completely destroy a person's interest in prayer, worship, and their overall connection to God. Now, this might just be the most fascinating detail from the sources. The jinn working with these fake healers actually rely on a centralized index, a literal database maintained by Iblis, or Satan. When human marriages are broken or spells are cast, the information is sorted, sometimes even by the mother's name, and recorded in this central unseen registry. So when a fake healer accurately tells a victim exactly what kind of magic was done to them, they aren't all-knowing. They are simply querying this demonic index. It's essentially a centralized, bureaucratic record of misery. Crazy, right? True Ruqya Sharia, by contrast, relies purely on sacred texts and natural permitted supplements. It involves prolonged recitation of specific Quranic chapters, particularly Surah Al-Falaq and Surah An-Nas. It incorporates physical elements that are highly praised in the texts, things like honey, black seed, and olive oil. But most importantly, it requires absolute reliance on God. The accounts note that true Ruqya is definitely not a quick fix or an overnight magic trick. It is a patient, sometimes very lengthy process that simultaneously heals the affliction while rebuilding the person's faith from the ground up. But there is one absolutely crucial prerequisite mentioned in the sources for this authentic healing to actually occur. The patient must entirely remove all physical amulets, commonly known as tabis, from their body. The texts recount stories where the Ruqya recitation was having literally zero effect until the practitioner realized the patient was still wearing amulets hidden around their neck. The very moment the amulets were removed, the unseen entities were expelled. The theology firmly argues that holding on to these cultural superstitions actively blocks the divine healing. You can't have it both ways. Which brings us to a final, provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. Knowing how these source texts view the evolution of magic, from angels in ancient Babylon down to jinn eavesdropping on the heavens today, we really have to take a hard look at our modern habits. According to this theology, there is absolutely no such thing as harmless fortune-telling. So the texts leave the believer with a pretty heavy question to ponder. Are you really just reading that horoscope for entertainment, or are you unknowingly opening a door to the unseen world? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I will see you in the next explainer.